Okay, my name's Danny. Um, I've experienced ayahuasca almost 50 times now, 50 ceremonies. Um, so I served in the Legion, um, came back, my life went downhill, used a lot of alcohol, depression, possible PTSD. These were all undiagnosed, but there were issues. And I'd read a lot, or read a little bit about ayahuasca and the benefits of psychedelics. So by 2015, I made a decision on a whim to fly out to Iquitos in Peru, um, and I experienced ayahuasca 5 times for the first time in November 2015. Uh, Went 60 kilometers out of Iquitos into the jungle with a part of the Shipibo tribe. So it was a small group of us, I think about 8, 9, 10 Westerners. So it was a varied bunch from, I think one guy was a former Buddhist monk, a few Americans. There was a nurse from Ireland, and we all experienced ayahuasca. Some people were quite experienced with psychedelics, but this was my first time. So I was 30 or 31 at the time. So I drank ayahuasca. The first experience, I drank 3 big cups, and absolutely nothing happened. And I was thinking, well, I've paid money and I've not experienced anything, so I really didn't understand what was happening. Then the second ceremony, 2 nights later, I drank a small cup of ayahuasca, um, and my consciousness just changed forever. It was the most profound experience. It's the word we use in psychedelics is ineffable, which there's no way to describe it. In the closest thing I can say to it is by the end of the experience, the universe just exploded into light, and it was a feeling of love and acceptance and forgiveness. It sounds cliche, but that's exactly what it was. So I came back from Iquitos, completely changed forever. Had to know everything about these substances, primarily ayahuasca. Started reading all the books that I could from Terence McKenna, Graham Hancock. Um, I attended a conference in Amsterdam called ICPR, which is the Interdisciplinary Conference in Psychedelic Research. So that was in 2015. Um, so I met some of the top people that are instrumental in this psychedelic renaissance, as it's known. Rick Doblin from MAPS, Dennis McKenna. Um, then I went out to a place called the Temple of the Way of Light, which is very it's a very professional run retreat centre in Iquitos. They work a lot with addicts, addiction. They work with people, service members, people that have served in the military from the UK, Europe, the United States. Um, and it's a very well run retreat centre. So I drunk 7 times there. And again, the impacts on my mental health, my consciousness, it was profound. Came back, did more reading, did more research, attended some more conferences. Brazil, the second World Ayahuasca Conference in Brasilia, or it's in, I can't think of the name of the city, but it's in Brazil. And I've attended another place called the Ayahuasca Foundation, which was a smaller group. That was 6 weeks in the jungle with quite a small group of us. And I started learning about plant medicines. So it's not just ayahuasca and not just psychedelics. The tribes out there, primarily the Shipibo, which is a tribe in Peru, they learn all about different plant medicines, how plants can heal different things physically, mentally. I mean, the Amazon jungle, you have hundreds of thousands of plants that the Western science doesn't fully understand. We don't understand what these plants can do for us. Um, and it was just a life-changing experience. So yeah, there are retreat centres in Portugal. I think it's decriminalised in Portugal, and I'm hearing stories from right across the world now, from Japan to Europe to the United States, of people using these substances for the benefit of their mental health. We call them medicines. Traditionally, they're the medicina. So I think psychedelics, it's in the West we view them as party drugs or as recreational substances, but there's a lot more to them.
What
Going back,
about addiction or likelihood of addiction?
I've never heard of anyone being addicted to psychedelics. The only thing I've heard is it curing addiction, so people being addicted to it. It's helped me with alcohol, so I did have alcohol issues. I would say that using psychedelics was primarily the main healing substance for my addiction to alcohol.
If you had access to it every day, would you take it every day? Do you need to take it every day?
No, no, definitely not. I mean, I'm not planning on using psychedelics for a number of years, if ever again. The experience is so profound and so powerful. You couldn't you couldn't use them every day. So I would say there's no risk of addiction. Um,
Do the tribes use it every day? The ones that you stayed with, start for real?
no, they use it maybe weekly, weekly to monthly. And they they regard it as being trained in something. So they would regard the way we view a surgeon, the way that a surgeon has to go through like an education which would take up to 7 years. They regard their training in ayahuasca, being an ayahuasca, they regard it in the same seriousness, the same intense training. Um, so they call them dietas, plant dietas. So they would drink to become an ayahuasca. I think sometimes they would drink daily for a number of weeks on their own in the jungle. But then once they're fully qualified, they might not drink for months on end. But it's a completely different culture the way they view it.
Where do they get it? How do they get it?
So the ayahuasca is a vine, um, and the actual they brew it with a plant called, well, there's a number of plants in the Amazon that can be brewed with. I can't think of the name that's primarily used, but the plant is what contains DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is the psychedelic compound. And when humans ingest DMT, our stomach won't allow, the enzymes in our stomach won't allow us to break it down and to feel the effects of it, the psychedelic effects. So they brew it with ayahuasca, which is a MAO inhibitor, is what it's called. So they brew it together for a number of days. It could take 3 to 4 days. There are different ways of brewing it throughout the Amazon. They brew it slightly different with different plants, but mainly ayahuasca is the MAO inhibitor, and they'll use a DMT plant. And when they brew it together, then it's a drink. It becomes a brew.
What's it taste
Awful.
like how awful on a scale of 1 to pure awful?
I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe 8 to 8.5. It does vary from different ayahuasca, but it tastes awful. There's no way to describe the taste.
Is it thick? Is it glitty? Or
It can be really thick. So it's not another reason why you can never become addicted to it. It's not a nice or an enjoyable experience to drink. So sometimes you have to gulp it down.
so how much?
A cup could vary
Okay.
from,
Is that a cup?
yeah, so that would be a large cup. So that would vary. It depends on the type of ayahuasca. So you could have maybe that much. It could be a shot. Could be a larger cup. Um, and then throughout the ceremony, you'd maybe drink 2 to 3 times. So one thing I was always reluctant to do is called the purge, the infamous purge, where you have to drink until you start puking up. Now, I was always reluctant to purge, but the purge is part of the ceremony. So it sounds bizarre to people that never experienced it, but you drink a cup, and your stomach will be rumbling, and you think, "Oh, I need to be sick." You'll try and hold it back. I would say drink, and if keep drinking till you start purging. Once you purge, then the experience comes on, and traditionally, that's part of the healing. So a purge might not always be being sick; could be a physical purge of shaking or crying. Um, so some Western psychiatrists, and they look at this as maybe in terms of trauma, healing some sort of trauma that needs to come out of you. Um, yeah, so it's not a nice experience, but then the experience you could be having internally could be wonderful. Um, yeah, so I've had experiences where I've met angelic beings. I don't like to get religious with the term. I don't like to use religious terminology, but I would use the term mystical. So they were like mystical beings. Now I'm not too sure whether these beings are actually real or whether they're actually your psyche could be so profound or so intricate that it could produce something so powerful. And whether it is real or not, the healing benefits are there. So I don't want to debate whether these beings that you interact with are real or not. Whether your mind produces them, as long as you get some sort of healing from it. For me to come back and say, well, I met these angelic beings, people might look and think, well, that's a religious experience. It's like prophets talk about stuff like that. But I'm not saying it's real or it's not real. That's we might never discover that through science. We might never know. But to me, it seemed real enough. And if my mind can produce something that intense and that real, then that's quite amazing in itself. So yeah, the communication, and they were giving me messages how to live my life, how to be happy, how to experience life, how to navigate this plane of existence, if that makes sense. I mean, the words I'm using and terminology sound really mystical, but it's the only way I can describe it. So these beings were telling me to be happy, not to worry about things that are beyond my control. Because I think a lot of people, just in the Western world, we worry about things from the news to things, and these things are beyond our control. So these beings were telling me telepathically, "Don't worry about this." Don't. And I was arguing with them. I was arguing back, saying, "Well, you're not a human being. You don't know what it's like to live like this in this plane of existence, this physical realm." And it was like a conversation that went on for maybe an hour and a half, and then it it felt like maybe hours and hours. But when I came round, it was maybe a 3 or 4 hour experience, and it felt like maybe 12, 24 hours. Time distortion can be. I've heard accounts of people that they've had experiences that's felt like days, and it's literally been 2, 3 hours. Um, I've had experiences where it's felt like a few moments, and I've come round and it's the end of the ceremony, and it's been like a 6 hour ceremony. You kind of come round. I don't know because I've never meditated or anything like that, so I've never experienced anything similar. So when I say come round, we call it. I can't think what the word is. It's like a word for being drunk, ayahuasca drunk in Spanish, uh, and so you can feel tipsy, you're hallucinating, um, and then all of a sudden, maybe by the early morning, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, you just seem to sober up, um, and you're back to normal by the next day, but with this profound experience. And with the Shipibo tribes that I've drunk with, that I've traditionally always drunk with, they usually have a sharing ceremony as well in the morning or the day after, which means everyone that's taken part in the ceremony shares their experience. No one's forced to share anything that they don't want to share. No one's You're encouraged to. And the idea behind that is maybe someone has experienced something, or they've articulated something that someone else isn't able to articulate, or they've brought. So everyone is kind of sharing the ceremony, how they. So that's also part of the healing. Um, so it's quite personal within the group. So everyone shares something. They share their experience, share why they want to be there, what they hope to gain, and that's. They there's a guide to it in terms of the ayahuasca rolls. They sing. They're called ikaros. So they sing like traditional Shipibo ikaros. They sing these. They sound really bizarre to a Westerner. It's like the only way I can describe it, it's a bit like improvisational jazz. And it's Spanish and Shipibo language with a bit of English, and it just sounds like rambling. They just seem to sing these ikaros, but apparently that guides the ceremony. So it lifts the energy up and down, and they're working with. They call it the spirits of the plants. The plant spirits come into the ceremony, and they lift up the energy, and through the guise of singing, and they encourage everyone else to sing as well. Um, so there's some sort of guidance, and apparently the ayahuasca will guide the ceremony in terms of how people are reacting to the ayahuasca, whether they're having a good ceremony, bad ceremony. They also work a lot with tobacco. Obviously, in the West, tobacco is a bad um, connotation to it, but the tobacco that they use is pure tobacco. They don't inhale; they use it as a medicine. So there's tobacco involved. and they kind of guide the ceremonies in that way. And the retreats I've been to, they always have Westerners on hand to help people, like obviously to communicate between English and Spanish. And they're usually quite experienced. They can tell if someone is having a traumatic experience. They can go over and guide them, help them. If someone's kind of losing where they are or why they're there, and they're having a bad experience, they can sit down next to him. I would say no touching involved. Morning. Um, no touching involved. So they would go over, guide people, just gently tell them that everything's okay, where they are, how what they're experiencing, that they'll be okay in the morning. Um, that's a sign of a good retreat centre. If there's no one on hand, they call facilitators. So if you don't have a good facilitator that should be there giving you all the information prior, before you go to these retreat centres, you should be screened, uh, mental health screening, physical screening, whether you're on any antidepressants, any issues with other substances, should be screened for stuff like that. Then a facilitator should be telling you exactly what should be happening at the ceremony. Um, they give you a dieta, so food not to drink. You're not supposed to drink alcohol in the weeks prior. Use cannabis, substances like that. And whilst you're there, they obviously they don't want um, participants engaging with each other sexually, relating to each other sexually. Don't want, especially during the ceremony, they don't want touching. So it's a very personal experience. You could have someone next to you, literally 2 or 3 feet away, puking up, having screaming, having. But if you're in a good space, they don't. It doesn't inhibit on your ceremony that you could be in your own space. And then by the end of the ceremony, everyone seems to come round at the same time. Um, yeah, and people have had amazing experiences from it.
And it wasn't just.
No, it was everybody. It was a mixture, and that can be quite a beneficial thing. I've heard people that are wanting to put on retreats purely for military, for obviously mostly males that have served in the military. I don't think that would be a good idea. I think it would because you with a mixture of people, you're meeting different people, different walks of life, different religions, different views on what this is, different reasons for being there. That can be actually quite healing in itself. So you might talk to someone like a girl from America who suffers from anorexia or suffers. That could be that's someone I would never engage with normally. So that could be part of the process. Listening to someone else's story, putting yourself in their perspective as well, understanding something you won't always understand, and then they can listen to you as well and listen to what you've experienced, your trauma, and you're not forced to share this stuff. You're kind of encouraged to, but at any point you can say, I don't wish to share anything, and people respect that view. Um, so you're not pushed too far. If so, there are people that have drunk ayahuasca the next morning. They just said, I don't feel comfortable sharing, and everyone's okay with that, and they move on. And then they might come next day. They might say, oh, well, actually, I do want to share something with the group. Um, this is what I've experienced. This is how ayahuasca helped me. This is what I experienced in the ceremony. I think it should be regulated. I think that there are some horror stories from. It's like a wild west out in Iquitos at the moment in Peru. So people are setting up retreat centres that maybe aren't fully qualified. When I say qualified, there is no regulation at the moment. Um, so there are horror stories of women being potentially abused sexually whilst they're under the influence of ayahuasca, people that have undergone a really traumatic experience and haven't had the help that they've needed. They've just given them ayahuasca and then just kicked them out the next day into Iquitos. Um, so yeah, it should be regulated. So there should be screening as to carefully. You don't want to say some people can drink ayahuasca, some people can't. There should be some sort of screening. Um, there should be some people that are discussing this at the moment, and as to psychedelic training. Um, what sort of training as a Westerner, as a Western psychiatrist or Western counsellor, what sort of training is required to interact with these substances, to be giving these substances to other people, and how best to help them. Um, So some people might prefer. I've always drunk it in a traditional, like indigenous setting. Some people maybe prefer clinical setting. So traditionally, like psychotherapy, maybe with a substance like MDMA. It might not always be ayahuasca. It could be MDMA or psilocybin mushrooms. So that might work better for other people. And obviously, recreationally, people have always taken these substances. I mean, these substances have been used for thousands, tens of thousands of years, but they are powerful substances. And if you were to just take them, especially on your own, and have a really traumatic experience, and no one was there to help you, you could come out worse than when you went in. So they should be regulated to some extent. People are a bit worried how the government would regulate that. Who has a say on what how it should be regulated? Um, who has a say on who's required to train these people? What sort of training they're required? So this is all being discussed at psychedelic conferences at the moment. Different groups are discussing it. You have a number of in the UK. We have um, the University of Greenwich is running a program next year. At the moment, it's the Imperial College of London. So they've done a lot of research, like in terms of, especially with psilocybin. So in the UK, it's still being formed. They're still looking into it. In the US, when you look into it, they didn't have as much research going into. Well, they did, but now it's become decriminalised and legalised in different states. You have a lot of startups where people are wanting to make money out of this. And I think that's quite a dangerous thing, because then the incentive is more on the money than it is on actually healing a patient or healing someone's trauma, helping them. It's the emphasis then is, well, can we make money out of this? Silicon startups and stuff like that. Um, yeah, regulations, it should be a big thing. I mean, my view is that we all have some sort of trauma um, from childhood. I mean, I believe our culture, the way our culture's set up, the way our society functions globally, is not a nice place. So I would say all people can experience something positive from these substances, and the fact that you have a mystical experience, or possibly, hopefully, or possibly a mystical experience, can only be a beneficial thing. How you want to interpret that is up for debate. Whether you want to interpret that religiously, mystically, whether having a mystical experience, I would say for anyone, could only be a good thing. Um, mm.